I asked artists which color pickers they use when painting, and I got some interesting responses. Out of 970 votes, 2%, or 19.5% of you, said that you use RGB sliders for your art. Some people like to debate whether the square or triangle is better, but what if I told you that this 2% are actually right? Today I'm here to tell you that RGB sliders are torture, but they work. Have you ever seen these two color diagrams? This one is obvious. You use it for painting with actual paints. Red plus yellow is orange. But how come it says here that red plus green is yellow? Knowing and memorizing this wheel is what helps you predict what color comes up when you play with these sliders. Okay, but why use this over this? So I was looking on Twitter when I came across this interesting post. It says that, hypothetically, if you want to add blue light with 2 simple moves of the RGB slider, easy, clean, done. Meanwhile, on the square, you have to shift the hue. You need to account for the gray. Also, you need to do this U-turn thingy. Interesting points, and it seems that many people agree. So you're telling me that I have to relearn this whole color model to use this. This sounds super troublesome. But if I can use it to make nice color gradients... Okay, I'm sold. And into hell I descended. This is how I learned to use the slider. First, I started with a sketch. I wanted to draw a guy since it's been a while, so I focused on this character J. After the liner, here comes the coloring. I first made vivid light layers for each color, and then underneath, I added normal layers for the shadows and highlights. I wanted to force myself to use the RGB sliders for all of this painting, since going head first and just toughing it out is usually the easiest way to get accustomed to new tools, since this was the first time I even considered using this color picker. However, I will say that this is a horrible mistake. One thing I really dislike about how this color picker works, on Clip Studio Paint at least, is that when you change one of the sliders, instead of maintaining this look, they change whenever you move them. So even though they had the letters RGB beside each slider, it's very easy, at least for me, to forget which slider is for red, which for green, and so forth. Because I already had an established look and envisioning of what colors I wanted, using the RGB sliders at this point of the process was just frustrating, because I needed to guess and check each time I used the slider and hoped I was getting close to what I envisioned. The learning curve here was brutal for me because I didn't have the foresight to have this helpful color mixer diagram here to look at. But I did come out of this painting knowing that I wanted to use this color picker more. Why, if it gave me so much trouble? The first is speed. Usually it takes me around 8 to 10 hours to paint something like this with even easier lighting. But in total, this took me 6 hours. Where did the 2 hours go? Why was I painting so much faster? But first, a tutorial on how to actually use it and get the colors you want. If you want a specific color, refer back to this diagram. I want yellow, so I know red and green equals yellow, so I increase these 2 sliders, red and green. The further right these sliders go, the closer the color is to pure white. If they're closer to the left, the closer it is to black. If you want gray, the sliders need to be equal to each other. So say you want a color but decrease how bright it is, lower all these bars. If you want to decrease the saturation, move these bars closer to each other. If you have a specific coloring method you use with different layer types, which mix and change the colors for you, this is not the peak performance of RGB sliders. If you have a specific look to your base colors, the way you get to these base colors will be needlessly harder, since you're relearning a whole new color mixing model. So of course it's torture the first time you use it. But these RGB sliders can actually be better than using the HSV color picker, and here's why. Where the RGB color sliders shine is when you're doing the paint over. Variation creates interest, so if you have your basic shades, shadows, and main colors down, and now you want to make everything look polished, adding even more variations in color, this is where I found RGB easier than HSV. While painting over with the HSV square, I usually pick a random direction on the wheel to switch the hue, but then I need to adjust the value to match, wasting time on the color picker deciding and tweaking the colors bit by bit to get what I want when painting over. But because this color picker incorporates both value and hue when you adjust the sliders, when you want to make the variations in color, aka change the hue, the amount of value isn't too affected. It's just so much easier to find agreeable colors. Because I'm spending less time deliberating, I'm wasting less time, and thus I'm painting faster. But that's just a hypothesis, so I tried it again with a second painting. Will it be faster? Or am I just imagining things? Okay, new painting, new character, Inez. Instead of laying all the base vivid color layers first, I worked on each part one at a time to see if the work process would be easier. But because this time I didn't have a particular color palette or lighting scheme in mind, I ended up wasting a lot of time eventually fixing the colors later with hue, saturation, luminosity, tonal correction. For example, the skin and hair were way too pink toned, so I had to rein it in a little. I had so many problems with the hair that I just painted over everything, but everything was suspiciously fast once again, and suddenly everything clicked. Why is the paint over and fixing part, adding different color variations for the strands of hair, so fast and simple? Say I wanted to add more colors to this area. With RGB, it's as simple as eyedropping the base color from the canvas and jiggling these sliders back and forth. It's like when you're using traditional and adding little drops of different colors to make the painting less flat. I ended up with about the same amount of time, 5 hours, but I would say the hair rendering was a bit nicer. So I found the part of painting where RGB sliders excel. Let's apply it to something which needs a bunch of variations, a painting with a background. I'll use the square picker for the base colors, and then switch to the RGB sliders when I do the paint over. Say I wanted to add more variants of purple, green, and yellow to this background, and I just changed the HSV value slider. Between different hues, how dark a color is changes drastically. But using the RGB slider, and only moving a little at a time, you are changing the color, but the value doesn't change that harshly. It's so much easier to find good color combinations and add variation. Not to mention, if you want beautiful gradients, just keep changing the slider bit by bit. After adding a vivid light layer for the rays of light peeking through the clouds, I started painting the character, Freyren. I used the square color picker for the base colors and then switched to RGB sliders for the paint over. I eventually softened the colors with tone curve to add more pink and purple. And with the background, this painting, which usually with the background would be 12 hours, was reduced to 7. The power of RGB sliders. I learned how to use RGB sliders, but the learning curve is steep. Don't use this for your whole process unless you want pain. I only did it so I could learn these tips, which I'm giving to you. Use whatever color picker you're used to, and then switch to when you get to this part of your process for the variation in paint over. Skip the hard part and just use it for where it shines and is actually easier to use than this HSV color picker. And, at least for me, it speeds up my paintings. Or now that I think about it, am I faster because I hated using it so much that I just wanted it over with? Anyways, I think that any artist who likes colors should at least give it a try. And that was how I learned RGB sliders, and how you can use them too. Thanks for watching. See ya!